In the small town of Fairhaven in 1911, a quiet dread began to grow inside the Miller household. At first, it was nothing more than whispers. Eliza, the youngest daughter, was a little more tired than usual. She would often return from the fields with pale cheeks and trembling hands, claiming she felt light as a feather and ready to drift away. Her parents thought it was nothing, a child's way of excusing herself from chores. But soon the signs could no longer be ignored. Eliza would fall into deep, sudden sleeps at strange times. At the dinner table, mid-conversation, her eyes would roll back and her body would slump as though life itself had abandoned her. She would remain still for hours, her pulse faint, her breath almost imperceptible. Every night, when the clock struck 9, the same dreadful scene unfolded. Her body would grow limp, her skin cold, her heartbeat so slow that even her mother, pressing her ear to Eliza's chest, could hardly detect it. Doctors came and went. Some called it hysteria, others sleeping sickness, and one traveling physician, a man with a habit of making everything sound fatal, declared it a nightly death. The townsfolk began to talk. The Millers were a God-fearing family, but superstition clung to the whispers. Was Eliza cursed? Was she paying for some hidden sin? Her parents refused to give in to fear. Every morning, like clockwork, Eliza would open her eyes as if nothing had happened. She remembered nothing of her deaths. Her mother, Martha, would sit beside her bed all night, hand on her daughter's wrist, counting every faint heartbeat. Her father, Thomas, took to keeping the fire lit until sunrise, as if warmth alone could hold her soul in place. The illness worsened in winter. Sometimes Eliza's death lasted longer than the night. On one terrifying occasion, she lay motionless until noon the next day. Thomas nearly ordered the coffin to be made, certain this time was different. But just as they began to weep over her body, her fingers twitched, her eyes fluttered open, and she smiled faintly, asking if breakfast was ready. The town began to change its opinion. Instead of calling her cursed, some began calling her the miracle girl. People came to the Miller's home to see for themselves. Farmers, traveling salesmen, and even a reporter from a city newspaper stood by her bed at night, watching for the moment she would die, and the moment she would return. It was a strange kind of fame, one that frightened Eliza more than it thrilled her. She didn't want to be a spectacle. She just wanted to live without the fear of closing her eyes. As she grew older, the episodes began to take their toll. Her body weakened. She could no longer walk to the schoolhouse without stopping to catch her breath. Every doctor had a theory. Some said her heart was too slow. Others thought her brain shut down to reset itself each night. One foreign physician suggested an experimental treatment involving electric shocks, but Thomas refused, unwilling to risk harming his daughter further. Despite her frailty, Eliza was not without spirit. She spent her waking hours reading, sketching, and writing in a small journal that she kept hidden beneath her bed. In it, she wrote not of her illness, but of her dreams, both the ones she had while awake and the ones she imagined in the moments she could not remember. She spoke often about wanting to do something meaningful before the last night comes. The family's faith kept them grounded. Martha prayed over her daughter every night, whispering, "You are not gone, my girl. You are only resting. God's not done with you yet." Those words became a lifeline for Eliza, a reminder that her strange condition was not a curse, but perhaps a calling she didn't yet understand. In time, the town began to see her not as the girl who was dying every night, but as the girl who lived every morning. Her perseverance in the face of an unexplained, frightening condition inspired others who battled their own invisible struggles, illnesses, grief, or private pains that no one else could see. Her life was a mystery to medicine, but to the people who loved her, it was proof of something greater, that survival, even in the smallest doses, is an act of courage. And though the doctors never gave her a name for her condition, Eliza gave it one herself in her journal, the unseen illness, proof that the dark is never final. By the time Emily turned 14, her nightly brush with death had become something her family whispered about but tried not to think too deeply on. They prayed it was simply some strange sleep condition she would grow out of, like a phase that would vanish with time. But one crisp winter night in January, their fragile hope was shattered. It began like any other evening. Emily's mother tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and whispered a blessing under her breath. The wind outside rattled the windows of their old farmhouse, and the faint smell of wood smoke lingered in the air. Emily smiled softly before drifting into her strange, fragile slumber. Only this time, she didn't stir in the early hours like she usually did. No twitch of her fingers, no slight rise and fall of her chest. Her mother woke at 2:17 a.m., gripped by a sudden, unexplainable urge. She hurried into Emily's room, expecting to see her daughter's familiar shallow breathing. But when she placed her hand on Emily's arm, it was cold, so cold that panic surged instantly through her. "Emily," she whispered, shaking her gently. "Nothing." She shook harder. "Emily." Still nothing. Her mother's voice cracked as she screamed for her husband. He came running, and when he touched their daughter, his face drained of color. She had no pulse. Her skin was pale as candle wax. Her lips had turned the color of faded lilac. In those agonizing seconds, reality hit them. This was not some strange quirk of her body. This was death, right there in their hands. Emily's father started CPR. His trembling hands pressed on her small chest, counting each compression in his head while her mother dialed the town's doctor. The phone line crackled, and the old physician, Mr. Avery, told them he would be there as quickly as the snow-covered roads would allow. But minutes passed, and Emily lay limp and lifeless. The cold air from the cracked window brushed her face as if mocking their efforts. Her father kept going, pressing, breathing for her, tears streaming down his cheeks. Every moment felt heavier than the last, and then, at exactly 2:39 a.m., a gasp. It wasn't much, but it was enough to freeze them in disbelief. Emily's chest rose faintly, then again. Her eyelids fluttered, and she let out a tiny hoarse sound, somewhere between a groan and a sigh. Her mother collapsed beside her, clutching her face in her hands, thanking God over and over. Her father just sat there, staring at her in awe, too overwhelmed to speak. When Dr. Avery arrived minutes later, he examined Emily carefully. Her pulse was steady now, her breathing weak but present. He listened to her heart, shook his head in bafflement, and finally said, "I've never seen anything like this. But whatever this is, it's not over. She is dying every night, and tonight she came closer than ever to staying gone." The words sent a chill through the family. Emily herself, now more awake, looked around the room with wide eyes. "I heard you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I heard you calling me, and it was so dark, so cold. I didn't want to come back, but I knew you needed me. That night changed everything." They stopped treating Emily's condition like an oddity and started treating it like a battle, one they had to fight every single day. Her father kept a chair beside her bed from then on. Her mother stayed half awake through the night, afraid to miss the moment her daughter's heart would falter again. But most importantly, Emily herself began to understand something life-changing. Her life was a gift renewed every morning. That brush with the final end made her see each sunrise as a miracle, each breath as something worth fighting for. From that night on, the family's fear grew, but so did their determination. They no longer lived assuming tomorrow was guaranteed. And Emily, even at 14, began to carry a quiet strength that would later inspire many who heard her story. It was only the first close call, but it taught them that life's most fragile moments can be the ones that awaken the deepest courage. By the time Amelia turned 21, she had experienced more brushes with death than most people do in a lifetime. Every night she faced the same haunting truth: she might not see the sunrise. The illness that gripped her was relentless, a rare neurological condition that caused her body to shut down unpredictably during sleep. Doctors could do little more than monitor her symptoms and adjust medications, always warning her that there was no cure. For years, Amelia had lived in a cycle of fear, measuring her life in cautious steps, always holding back. But something inside her shifted after her third major episode, the one that had nearly taken her for good. She remembered lying in the hospital bed, hearing the faint sound of the heart monitor, feeling the weakness in her limbs, and realizing that she had been existing, not living. Every breath she took was borrowed time, yet she was wasting it on hesitation. "If I'm going to die," she thought, "I'd rather die having truly lived." That was the moment the decision took root. Instead of surrendering to fear, Amelia decided she would no longer treat her life like a fragile glass ornament that could only be placed on a high shelf and admired from afar. She would carry it, use it, risk breaking it if that meant experiencing it to the fullest. It wasn't recklessness she sought, it was freedom. She began making a list of all the things she had postponed because she was too sick or too fragile, learning to play the piano, taking a road trip to the coast, painting a sunrise instead of just watching it, telling the people she loved exactly how she felt without worrying if it sounded silly. Her first act of defiance against the illness was small but symbolic. One early morning, after surviving yet another risky night, she walked barefoot into her backyard and stood in the dew-soaked grass. The sun was rising, the light spilling over the horizon in gentle gold. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and whispered, "I'm still here." That simple acknowledgement became a ritual, a private victory she celebrated each day she woke up. But Amelia didn't stop there. She joined a local art class where she was the youngest member by decades. The older women in the group quickly took to her, both as a student and as a source of inspiration. "You paint like you're trying to squeeze a lifetime into each brushstroke," one of them remarked. Amelia smiled knowingly. Her new philosophy bled into every corner of her life. She reconnected with childhood friends she'd drifted away from, not out of guilt, but from a genuine desire to share moments with them again. She learned to bake bread, not because she needed to, but because she loved the smell of yeast filling the kitchen. She even started volunteering at a children's hospital, reading bedtime stories to kids who, like her, faced the shadow of uncertainty each night. The truth was, Amelia's illness hadn't gone away. She still had close calls, still woke up some mornings feeling like her body was holding on by threads. But her outlook had transformed those moments from paralyzing terrors into powerful reminders of her resilience. She had learned to stop asking "why me?" and start asking "why not me?" Why not live like her days were a gift? Why not leave behind memories and art and kindness that would last far longer than she would? Over time, people around her began to change too. Friends who had once pitied her now came to her for advice. Strangers who read her online journal wrote letters saying her courage had nudged them toward taking their own long-postponed risks. Even her doctors noticed the difference, not in her medical charts, but in the way she carried herself, shoulders back, eyes bright. One evening, after returning from a short trip to the mountains, a trip she'd dreamed of for years, Amelia sat in her bedroom and began writing in her journal. "I don't know how many nights I have left," she wrote, "but I do know this: I am no longer waiting for life to be safe before I live it. I will live it now while I can still breathe, laugh, and love. If I die in my sleep, I'll know that I didn't waste the time I was awake." In that single choice, to live fully despite the ticking clock, Amelia transformed her life from a quiet tragedy into a fierce, luminous story of courage. And perhaps the most beautiful part was this: every morning she woke up wasn't just survival, it was another chapter she got to write. It was late autumn when the storm came, a wild, unrestrained fury that rattled the windows and bent the trees like they were nothing more than blades of grass. The sky, swollen with dark clouds, cracked open with flashes of lightning, painting the small town in momentary bursts of white. For most people, it was just another stormy night, something to be weathered indoors with blankets and warm drinks. But for Clara, it was a different kind of night. She sat in her bed, her breathing labored, every inhale feeling like a slow negotiation between her body and life itself. Her illness had grown worse over the months, and she knew, though she rarely admitted it out loud, that each night could be her last. The storm outside felt like a reflection of the storm within her chest. Her parents moved quietly around the house, pretending they weren't listening for every sound from her room. Her mother peeked in, smiling through the doorway, her eyes betraying the fear she tried to hide. "You should try to sleep," she whispered. "I don't want to," Clara replied softly, looking toward the rain-streaked window. "Not tonight." She couldn't explain why, but something about the storm felt Different? It felt like a test, a moment when life itself was asking her a question. Will you keep fighting even when the world around you feels like it's breaking? Around midnight, the thunder roared so loudly that the floor seemed to tremble. A sudden pain gripped Clara's chest, sharp and deep. She tried to call out, but her voice failed. The darkness in the room seemed to grow heavier, and a frightening thought passed through her mind. This is it. This is the night I don't wake up. Her father, sensing something was wrong, rushed in and found her struggling to breathe. He scooped her into his arms without hesitation, yelling for her mother to grab her coat. Outside, the wind clawed at them, rain slashing their faces as they fought their way to the old pickup truck. The road to the hospital was nearly impassable. Fallen branches, flooded patches, and the ever-present threat of hydroplaning. But he drove with a kind of desperate precision only a father fighting for his child could possess. Inside the truck, Clara felt the vibrations of the engine and the jolts of the uneven road. Between flashes of lightning, she caught glimpses of her father's hands gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white, jaw clenched, eyes forward. That image seared into her memory. A man who would drive through hell itself if it meant his daughter could have one more morning. By the time they reached the hospital, the power had gone out, and the building was running on backup generators. Nurses rushed to meet them, wheeling Clara into the emergency room. The rain pounded against the glass doors as doctors surrounded her bed. She drifted in and out of consciousness, catching fragments of conversation. She's in cardiac distress. Prepare the oxygen. We're losing her. And then silence, not in the room. There were still voices, still movement. But inside her mind, a quiet, deep, almost peaceful darkness. She wasn't floating toward anything. She wasn't falling away. She simply existed in a space without pain, without fear. But then, faintly, like a candle flame in the distance, she heard her mother's voice. "Clara, you are stronger than this. You are not leaving me tonight." The words broke through the fog. She remembered her mother's hand in hers, warm and unshakable despite the storm raging outside. Something shifted inside Clara. Maybe it was adrenaline, maybe it was love, maybe it was the stubborn refusal to give up. But she began to breathe again, slowly, painfully, but steadily. The monitors steadied. The panic in the room began to ease. The doctors kept working, but one of them glanced at her parents and gave the smallest nod. She was going to make it through the night. By dawn, the storm outside had passed. The sky was painted in soft pinks and golds, and the streets glistened with the aftermath of the night's chaos. Clara lay in the hospital bed, weak but awake, watching the light pour in through the window. Her father sat beside her, half asleep in a chair, his hand still resting on her blanket. Her mother was leaning on the other side, eyes closed but her grip on Clara's fingers unbroken. Clara thought about how close she had come to the edge. She realized that her life, fragile as it was worth every battle, every breath, every fight against the night. The storm had not taken her. Instead, it had taught her that sometimes you survive not because you're strong enough, but because someone loves you enough to keep pulling you back. And as the sun rose, Clara made herself a promise she would not waste the mornings she was given. When Clara passed away at the age of 57, the world mourned, not because she had been famous, but because she had been unforgettable. To many, she was the quiet force who had taught them that life wasn't about how many years you lived, but about how much life you put into those years. And Clara, the girl who died every night and woke every morning, had put more life into her years than most people dared to dream. Her condition had never been cured. Every night, she would fall into that coma-like state, her heartbeat slowing to a whisper, her breathing barely visible. It was still terrifying for those around her, but Clara had long since made peace with it. She had stopped asking why me and started asking what now. That was the pivot point in her life, the decision that would define her legacy. Instead of withdrawing, she pushed forward. She became a volunteer at the local hospital, sitting with patients who were afraid of death. She never preached to them or told them what to believe. She simply held their hands and said, "I understand fear, but I also understand waking up to a new day, to people in pain that was more powerful than any sermon." Her days were spent in motion. She traveled to villages to speak at schools, not about her illness, but about courage, about the idea that fear should not decide how you live. She told children that life was not measured in birthdays, but in moments you showed up fully. She organized small community projects, planting gardens, cleaning rivers, building benches in old parks. She said these things would outlive us, and that was the goal. Clara also became a writer, not because she sought recognition, but because she feared forgetting. She kept journals of every adventure, every moment of joy, every little fear she had conquered. These writings were later compiled into a book titled Before Morning Comes. It sold modestly, but for those who read it, it became a life manual, a gentle reminder that the clock was always ticking, and that love and courage were the best ways to spend your time. But perhaps the greatest part of Clara's legacy was personal. The young nurse who had once cared for her during one of her deaths was inspired to start a support group for people living with chronic, life-altering conditions. A shy teenager who heard her speak at school went on to become a doctor, telling people, "It all started when I met Clara." Even her neighbors, who had once kept their distance out of fear of her strange illness, found themselves planting flowers in her honor, remembering how she had once insisted beauty should be everywhere. When she finally passed away, this time without waking up, the community didn't hold a somber funeral. They held what they called the Mourning Festival. They decorated the streets with sunflowers, her favorite. They told stories of how she had helped them. They sang, they laughed, and yes, they cried. But not because she was gone. They cried because she had made them see life differently. Her journals were donated to a library, and one page, framed in glass, stood out to everyone who read it. It simply said, "If you wake up, you win, and if you wake up again tomorrow, win again." That line became her unofficial motto, printed on posters, shared online, whispered to loved ones before surgeries, written on cards given to grieving families. Clara's life had turned a rare and frightening condition into a message that would ripple through countless others. Her story was no longer just about the girl who died every night. It was about the woman who refused to waste a single morning. And that was the true miracle. Not that she kept waking up, but that she kept making it matter. In the years that followed, whenever someone faced a hardship they thought they couldn't overcome, someone else would inevitably say, "Remember Clara." And in that way her legacy kept breathing, just as she had through every dark night until the light of morning came again. Her story isn't just a strange medical tale or a piece of rare human history. It's a mirror. A mirror that shows us what we take for granted every single day, and a mirror that dares us to ask, if I knew my time could run out tonight, how would I live today? The girl who died every night and woke up every morning didn't have the luxury of pretending life was infinite. She couldn't coast through days under the illusion that tomorrow was promised. Every sunset was a whispered reminder that she might not see the sunrise, and yet she lived, she laughed, she made art, she made friends. She gave, she built something lasting. That's the lesson. Most people live as if life is a contract with endless renewals. They postpone dreams, they delay forgiveness, they keep their passions locked away for a better time. But the truth is, we are all like her. None of us have a guarantee that tomorrow will greet us. The only difference is that she knew her risk, and we pretend we don't. When she woke each morning, she treated it like a gift, not a right. She didn't wake up complaining about the weather, about traffic, about small inconveniences. She woke up grateful, and gratitude changes everything. It turns ordinary mornings into miracles. Her condition, strange as it was, forced her into clarity. She didn't have time to waste on grudges or petty rivalries. She chose to pour her energy into love, learning, and legacy. Imagine if we all did that, if every one of us woke up tomorrow and decided to live as though it could be the last sunrise we'd ever see. Not in fear, but in focus. Not in panic, but in purpose. Her life also teaches us about courage. It takes courage to face uncertainty every single night and still choose joy in the morning. Many of us let far smaller fears dictate our choices. We don't apply for the job because we fear rejection. We don't tell someone how we feel because we fear embarrassment. We don't start the dream project because we fear failure. Yet here was a girl whose fear could have been ultimate, the fear of never waking again, and she refused to let it cage her. That courage, that daily choice, is something we can all adopt, not by ignoring our struggles, but by meeting them head on. And maybe the most beautiful part of her story is the ripple effect. People around her began to change. Friends stopped taking their mornings for granted. Strangers she spoke to felt inspired to mend broken relationships. Communities she visited became more present, more alive. Her example reminded everyone that the clock is ticking, not to scare them, but to set them free from the lie of later. So here's the takeaway. You don't need a rare condition to wake up to the truth. You just need to decide. You can choose today to live awake, to see your mornings as blessings, to make decisions with urgency and kindness. You can choose to live so fully that even if the night does come and you don't see tomorrow, you've left something behind worth remembering. Because in the end, the real tragedy is not dying. It's dying without having truly lived. And if she were here smiling with that unshakable calm she carried, she'd probably tell you this: stop waiting, love now, forgive now, try now, because every day you wake up, you've already been given a miracle.